Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
Hey, this is Youth Worker on Fire. It's Doug Edwards. I am glad you're here for another episode. And today I have an incredible guest, Dr. Jonathan Denton from Charleston Southern University, Christian University in Charleston, South Carolina. Dr. Denton, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's summertime in Charleston and nothing's better.
Let me tell you, I have spent a few days in Charleston, and actually I spent years ago when I was right in college or out of college, and then this past about a year and a half ago with my children there, my oldest son and his wife. And
oh, great.
What a great place.
We love it. So you have beach, you have beautiful scenery, golf, everything. It's been great.
And you've got amazing historical sites there.
We do. Actually, where I live at was one of the signers of the Constitution, and George Washington came and rode horses where we live at.
Oh my goodness, that you
Isn't
know,
crazy?
and I don't, when we did some of the history stuff, I don't remember any of that. So that is really good for me to hear.
It's just a housing. It was a farm. It was the guy's farm, Charles Pinckney, and then now it is. I mean, there's houses, golf course, and that's where we live at. George Washington's ridden horses here.
Oh my goodness! We've always talked. The joke always was George Washington slept here,
Right?
And then George Washington was here. All those things. But you actually have a place where George Washington actually was.
That's correct.
And he hiked around. And if you haven't gone to Charleston, people, let me tell you what, it is one of the sights of the United States of America. It is just like no other. And you are one fortunate guy to be able to spend a career there doing some of this, Jonathan. And I call him Dr. Denton. I'm also calling him Jonathan. You have gone through a lot of things, and I want to start with this. At first, we said I'm going to have you catch us up, and we're going to, but I want everybody to know, I've read your CV. I ask you to send those things to me. There's just so much to read and so much going on here with your life. I'm guessing that you get approximately 30 minutes of sleep a night. You have for the last 25 years.
That's right.
In order to get all of this stuff in. I mean, guys, listen, you got to read his CV. It is just crazy. And all the courses that he teaches, all the things that he's done. And you went to Clemson. I was in Appalachian State University. That's where I went.
Okay, great.
You know all about that because Clemson and us.
I know that. Well, I actually know that well because I grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
Right on the other side of the mountain.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But Clemson, what a beautiful campus. What a place of great intelligence. And you're an engineering major there. I'll tell everyone this, and we're going to try to jump back to the other question about your life and catching us up and stuff. But Jonathan was an engineering major at Clemson. Number one, that tells me you got some brains. The second thing about being an engineering major, and then you went to seminary, you got your master's degree, your doctor's degree, and you can tell us the parts of that you want us to know about. The most important thing to me and this podcast is that you spent 10 years in student ministry in one place. And this podcast is about longevity.
Right.
And then you're an assistant professor at Charleston Southern University, and which is just a big deal. And if you go through, I'm not even going to try to list all the courses and different things that Jonathan has taught or teaches. The list is just amazing. Just go on Charleston Southern University site, go to faculty, look him up. It's really impressive. But the most impressive thing is anyone who can stay in one church for 10 years or longer in student ministry. So before we get into any more of that, I want you to do two things. I want you to tell us about the books you've written because they're very significant to our audience. and then I want you to catch us up on what's happening with your family right now.
Sure. Yeah. So, actually, in the last year with D6 Family, I actually have had two books that have come out. One is called Ancient Text, Modern World. And that actually came from, we do an apologetics conference for high school students on our campus at Charleston Southern. And with that, we'll usually bring in a main speaker that will introduce the topic. And then all of our Christian studies professors, they then, whether that be New Testament, Old Testament, whether that be history, philosophy, they love high school students. And so they teach different breakouts around the topic on that. And so a few years ago, we created one called Ancient Text, Modern World, talking about that our students are, growing up in a world yet that is modern, that is, that is changing almost every day, it seems. Yet we teach the Bible, right? A text that is 2,000 years old, yet is still so relevant to our students today. And so that's what that book unpacks, is the reliability, the authority of the Bible, and how it speaks to this audience. And so if you want to see a chapter in the wheelhouse of all of our professors at Charleston Southern, that's the book. Also, Dr. Alan Jackson, you probably know him from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and Dr. Jay Strack, they also from SLU and Youth Pastor Summit, both of those guys contributed a chapter in that work as well. The other book that just had come out last March, so only a couple months old, is a book called Disciple Making with Guys. And where that book came out of is when I started my ministry in Mississippi. And my wife, she also has her doctorate in Christian education from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And so I was the youth pastor. I said, hey, we have Sunday night, the traditional kind of 3, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Said, let's do some discipleship on Sunday night. And so she took the girls, I took the guys, and I asked her, how did your, first couple nights go? She's like, great. I mean, life change. How did yours go? Well, my guys broke a window with Play-Doh. Right? I didn't even know that was possible. But so and that really launched me into, okay, so how do we disciple guys? What does that look like? And really, as I started PhD work, was at that same time, right, with the broken window with Play-Doh, and began just sitting under Dr. Alan Jackson, and started reading books by education theorists on how guys learn. And so from that, alongside of just practically discipling and mentoring, as you said, for over 10 years at that church, and now for 7 years at Charleston Southern, that's really where the meat of that book came.
That is number one. It's a very needed book. The biggest frustration, I think, for a lot of student ministries is handling the guys.
Right.
Because when we would ever divide up into small groups, which we'd do at each major meeting that we did, and then we'd have discipleship on another day of the week, and the different people could choose their days.
Right.
And where you could see it capsulated is in middle schoolers.
Right.
Middle school girls will sit for a while, and they'll let you go through some stuff, and they're emotional, and they're intelligent, and they're thinking about that. And the guys are going, duh, let's go, let's play. Jesus what? Jesus, okay, well, you said Jesus twice. Can we do something else now?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then high school, it's not a whole lot different. They'll sit for a few minutes longer. So you have written this book that there's never going to be enough of those books.
Right.
And for you to have actually honed in on that tells me that you understand the incredible importance of knowing how to do that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is so crucial. And, what does that even look like? And as I began, even in secular education, theorists realizing something's going on, the number of issues that we're having with guys and discipline issues and where they are academically. And so as they began to study, just began to realize some things that really are crucial and key that we've seen about how we do, spiritual formation. They realize, hey, guys need guys in their life. Guys need adults in their life, and the numbers just continue to show that. The importance of when I studied, and so in my study for my dissertation, I studied college freshmen at 3 universities across the Southeast, and the number one thing that I found that correlated with faith maturity and collegiate guys their freshman year, so really it's being marked by their high school and junior high years in student ministry, was the number of adults that had poured into their life. And that was by far the number one correlation. And so when we as we've done brain research with guys, also understanding that they have been really for thousands of years have studied in apprenticeships. A lot of times we think girls as being relational, but that's how guys have learned. They've learned from men. They've learned from adults that are in their life, sitting alongside of them. And so the importance of adults, and that's one of my big things, is just getting as many adults, right? Obviously qualified, spiritually mature adults into the life of a teenager, just reaps such huge benefits. And then also the experiential learning piece of it. The guys learn when they are. There is importance for guys to sit and hear the word of God. Absolutely, sitting still, listening, taking notes. Right, that's crucial to our faith development. But a lot of education has moved to guys only sitting and listening. And so for us in ministry is also to capture those moments when we can be on a mission trip with guys, right? We can think through how do we take this lesson and apply it? One of the things I did as I studied that is that we were teaching another, through another discipleship course or another study. I wanted to study the life of Joseph, and I was studying this about experiential learning and then being able to use it. And so I went to our children's pastor and said, hey, I've got a great group of guys. They love to be involved in doing we've done mission trips and things in children's ministry. They would be great at this. What if we always did like a spring break kind of mini camp where we'd go to a retreat center, just our church. And I said, what if we wrote the curriculum and came up with the theme? And of course, the children's pastor was like, that sounds awesome, right? That's great. And he was kind enough to grant us that. But then I went to our guys and said, hey, we're going to study the life of Joseph like we would from the Word of God, but we have this opportunity to craft it into children's camp. And they bought in. And I was like, but I need you to be here, every Sunday night. We're going to study the Word. You've got to know it. And then we're going to write the curriculum and the small group questions. We're going to come up with the theme. And so what it did is I taught the Word of God, but I also got to teach how to study the Bible, how to write a lesson, how to teach a lesson, all those things together, kind of in that moment. And to this day, I still remember, I saw those guys a year ago, and they all still remember that moment as well.
Those are the type of moments that we forget to keep trying to find.
Right. Absolutely.
Because I can name on my one hand how many times in 35 years of student ministry that I did that kind of creation with students, and those are the students that still are impacted and still are calling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you can't, that's a lot of work. You can't do that every lesson, right?
Right.
But there are moments, and think about maybe a couple times, throughout their, maybe every 2 years, or, that you've given them an opportunity, or when they're ready to push them in that area.
Right. And it's not every group that's going to come up with guys like that are going to be
Absolutely
pliable and wanting to learn that much.
But we can still, at every lesson, still ask questions, such as, what would you do with this, or put them in situations, and that kind of experiential learning, even as we're just sitting in a group together.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. Why engineering? How did you go? And number one, I have several former students that are now, grown up in the engineering field. And what I've learned about engineers is most of them can't communicate. But you can communicate, and so can this one of my other buddies, former student, great communicator. So why that switch? How that switch? I mean, tell me God's journey for you from being an engineer all the way through now into Charleston Southern University.
It's interesting as you know by now, when you can start to look back and see God's hand and weaving and how he doesn't waste anything. And when I look back, I always knew that I had some type of calling into ministry. Didn't know what that was, right? I remember I'd have senior adult ladies who would say, "You're going to be a pastor one day." I was like, I don't even know who you are, right?
Right.
Yet you have, and you're conveying that to me. But I also knew that I had an opportunity to go to Clemson, study engineering. I knew that God was calling me there. I mean, I didn't even know much about Clemson, and it was it was pre-Dabo era where they sent me a letter and said, "Hey, we're waiving your out-of-state tuition. Here's your scholarship." And I was like, "Well, I need to check this place out." And I remember going and just, seeing FCA, just things like that I realized, God, this is exactly where God wants me to be, and to study engineering while I was there. And while I was there, I co-op, so I would work in the field a semester, right, on a job site. And then work or come back and take classes. And so it paid for all of my education that was there. But also what it did is give me an opportunity at the same time I was a youth director at a church as my youth minister's dad. He had a church right outside of Clemson. And so he brought me on. So I started back in 1999. In the 1900s, doing student ministry. And so I was doing that, and I was in the field doing engineering, and I got to the end, and I realized, and I was just praying, God, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to be bivocational? Do you want me to go full-time? All right, what do you want me to do? And I was actually in a Campus Crusade for Christ meeting. A pastor I don't know, even his name to this day, and he read from 2 Corinthians 5 that for Christ's love compels me. And that word and that phrase just gripped me like none other. And you know those moments when you're like, okay, God is speaking directly to me. And it says, that those who live for Christ should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt at that moment then that God was calling me into full-time ministry. And so from that point, now I still had a semester or so left, but I enjoyed engineering. I really liked it. So I finished with my civil engineering degree from Clemson University. And then I went to seminary in New Orleans. And it was just one of those things that I look back and, okay, God used that so that I could relate to adults that were in the field, right? That, the engineers that were in our church, right? I had a common ground. And now that I'm on a college campus where we have, where I teach in the Christian Studies department, but we have, health science, and we actually have an engineering program that just launched a couple of years ago. And so God gave me an opportunity to be over some faculty training for all of our faculty. And I just look back and I was like, okay, you trained me in this area where now I'm on a college campus, relating and being able to teach faith integration across all these different fields. So again, years and years, but now you're starting to see the weaving that God has been doing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And once again, and the education, whether it's Christian education, like Charleston Southern or some other place, when you have the spiritual depth that you have and the seminary training and the experience, the practical experience, but you've got this background that says, you know what, I could have been just like everybody else. I could have been an engineer. I could have been all those things that we relate with or without God. And for some reason, even Christians are impressed with that.
Right.
I mean, aren't they? I mean, you tell me.
They are. Some are still befuddled, like they still don't quite get
right,
it.
Exactly.
That's okay.
That's right. Tell me, before we go any farther, tell everyone how they can get in touch with you. Tell us all the ways that we can get in touch with you.
Email is probably the easiest. J Denton, E as in dog, ENTON at CSUNIV, V like Victor, .edu. And so that's just CS University, but stopping at the v.edu. So that's the easiest way. And I'd be glad, to communicate with you. If there's ever anything that I can help, and anybody, church work, by all means, be glad to do that. So that's there. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. If you just search for my name, you can find those there. But primarily, probably email is probably the best way.
What was your worst moment in life and worst moment in ministry? And if there's only one of those you want to be specific about, just do one, but give us both if you can.
Yeah. So the worst moment in our life, we were 3 weeks into our marriage. My wife and I, we both went to Clemson. We had started a seminary at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and we got married in 2005. And if you know anything about 2005 in New Orleans, 3 weeks after we got married, there was a hurricane named Hurricane Katrina.
Oh my!
That came through New Orleans. So we were going back home to pick up our wedding pictures. And my boss at that time, I was working for student enlistment at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, said, you might get a long weekend. Well, that long weekend turned into a long period of time where we joke, we say that was the only time we had matching furniture was the first 3 weeks of our marriage because we lost, everything through that. But God was good. He provided. I mean, we lived in, I think, 7 different states in our first year of marriage, just, going from place to place, trying to do some ministry, trying to take classes, all those things, just surviving. But, those moments, as hard as they are in the moment, I mean, you look back with gratitude because of how much God takes care of you in those times and just the grit and fortitude that He builds, not only in our marriage, but in our ministry, in our own individual lives through that.
Well, and you said you lost everything. What do you mean by you lost everything? You mean the place you were going to live?
Well, anything that could take on mold. I lost my Jeep.
Oh, wow.
And so I had a Jeep that was underwater on our seminary campus. I never saw it again. And then we lost, we were just outside of the levee that broke, but we had roof damage. So it was deemed unlivable, and really anything that could take on mold, we lost. We were able to keep some things that were kind of sealed up or things that we hadn't necessarily really unpacked yet, and some clothes that we could wash and stuff. But, all of our furniture, anything that was cloth that could have mold, because it was, 3-4 weeks before we could get back into the city to get those things.
I mean, that's a bad time. That's a bad time for sure. Well, tell a worst ministry moment.
I don't know that I have a singular one, but the hardest ministry moments are those moments when, when you have to let a leader go, especially someone that's close to you. I mean, those are the things that jump out, to my mind. The first, just those worst moments that are there. The worst moment that I probably had was the first time on a funny kind of funny note is thinking through when my first year we decided to go to West Palm Beach for Centrifuge for summer camp. And I was like, hey, it looks to be about a 10-hour drive. Not too bad. We were used to that. We had a charter bus. We're taking our church bus. Well, that's when gas prices skyrocketed. And the bus company's like, no, they won't let us drive over 55 miles an hour. And that 10-hour trip ended up being 16 hours.
Oh,
it was
no.
the longest trip. And I learned at that moment I better factor a little bit more time in than I thought on these trips.
And how was it handling the students on that trip?
They still talk about how long that trip was.
No. That's a miserable trip. That's what that is. Best life moment, best ministry moment.
Yeah, I mean, life moment. I mean, those are obvious. Wedding, the birth. I've got 2 boys. So I have Josiah, who is he's a 7th grader now, and Baxter, who's a 3rd grader. Both of those we got to lead to Christ, and so and just last year, this is a Charleston thing. We got to do beach baptism right off the beach with them, so that was a sweet moment.
That is sweet. I'm going to change this up. Instead of best ministry moment, we already know your best ministry moment was when the clay baseball went through the window.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's go to college. Let's go to university. And best ministry moment that you didn't see coming from maybe one of your students there?
The best moments now that I've been here, 7 years, I've had a few classes that have graduated. And honestly, when I meet someone who is a pastor, a minister, that one of my students is, they're just doing a great job. And the pastor, the youth, or a parent, they're just excited and they're bragging on that student and what they're doing. Those are the moments where you're like, okay, all this work, all this teaching, all those moments in the classroom, those things are worth it.
Anything that one student ever said to you that just kind of took you off guard, but made your day?
Students, just asking questions. The one thing that we do, and that's really that I missed during, because half of my time of teaching has been through the COVID era, and so trying to teach that was just that's a whole nother discussion, there. But we're starting to see it again. Is that all of our Christian studies professors, we're all in this hallway together, and we leave our doors open, and just students that just stop by to hang out, to ask questions. What I love is those moments when they're like, hey, this is what's going on in my ministry. This is the thing that happened, and just getting to hear, right, getting to talk them through it, giving them some ideas, and then when they take those back and then come back and say, hey, that really worked, or that really made a difference, or even it didn't, and we kind of regroup and try again, try another avenue on it. And so really kind of that open door policy of when our doors are open, and most of the time they are, right, we have students who are dropping in, coming in. That's the exciting part of being a college professor.
Man, if you've got students that are wanting to go to a great place, I'm sure you've got this mental image now of these professors and their doors open, and students having them available to them after their time in class. That's a great visual. Let's go back to family. What is something you and your family have done at Adventure, possibly, together that almost no one knows about?
One thing we did last year is that we used to do our family vacation, and we would go up to the lake, rent a boat, or to the beach. We live at the beach, but actually getting a beach house and walking right out onto the beach. We used to do that after summer camp, and we take about 70 middle schoolers to summer camp, to mission camp. And so, that's a lot of middle schoolers. a tired weekend when we come back off of that. And so and so we came back and we went on family vacation and we were just exhausted. I was sick, my kids got sick, and we said, you know what, we're going to do family vacation at the beginning of the year. So we tried that last year, went great. And then we had done camp, VBS, everything by the end of June. And so July, we kind of checked all the boxes off. Well, at the end of July, we said my oldest had turned 12 at that point, and that was the first year he really didn't want to have a birthday party. He just wasn't feeling it that year. I said, well, bud, we haven't done anything through the month of July. What if we took the money that we would do for your birthday party and let's just go down to Orlando? We got a cheap place, one of the value resorts at Disney World. And instead of going into the parks, I was like, we always did his birthday's in the summer. So we always, rented one of the big water slides, classic youth ministry thing. And so we said, well, what if we just as a family just did a water park at Disney? We've never done that before. And so literally it was Thursday, Friday before they started school that next Monday. And we just had a blast. It was just a family weekend, a quick one. And one of those moments that we just all loved.
And by the way, to those of you who are not from Florida, this podcast is done in Florida. We're only an hour from Disney. And if you're going in July, you want to be going to the water parks. You don't.
We actually got pretty good rates for everything.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because you want to be able to get cool. And nothing else there is cool.
And it was great. It was a great weekend.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's wonderful. What is a question you wish people would ask you about yourself, but almost nobody does?
Yeah, I would say, we've kind of talked about it, but one question I actually don't get a whole lot is, where did you grow up at by this point? So a lot of times it's, oh, you're from New Orleans, you're from Clemson, you're from Charleston. And I've just realized now I'm in that season of life when a lot of people don't know that I grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee, in the mountains. And so that's one of the things as I reflect on that, I was like, because I get asked a lot of questions. I've done student ministry for 25 years now. I teach college students. I get a lot of questions, but that's one that I just haven't answered in a long time.
Yeah. That's because Tennessee is a whole lot different than New Orleans. It's a whole lot different than South Carolina or Charleston, and especially Charleston.
And I was in Mississippi for 10 years.
That is another animal. That's a whole different thing.
So from New Orleans to South Carolina, Mississippi, and Tennessee, that's 4 distinct places for sure.
And if you think that all those places being in the South means that they're all the same, you are sadly mistaken. If you're from some other place other than the South or other than the United States, each of those areas are unique unto themselves. Jonathan is well-rounded in many ways that you cannot imagine. And plus, when you're talking Charleston, that's an international city.
It is.
When you're talking New Orleans, international city.
It's its own city.
It's its own city. There's just not a doubt about that. Tell me about longevity. This podcast is all about longevity. Why in the world should anybody stay in a place 10 years in student ministry in one place?
You get to a point, or at least I did, where about year 2, 3, 4, by that point I realized a lot of my ideas I've done now, and so when I got to there, and what that forced me to do then is really open myself up to my student committee, to the adults that were there in the room, and really begin to just dream, to just talk about issues that maybe is not my natural bent to really want to dive into. And at that point, I felt like we made a big turn, where now I have a lot of voices that they're engaged with it. They're thinking through things. And I mean, the health of our ministry just began to really grow from that point. Numerically, obviously, but just the spiritual maturity, across the board. And so you just being there for 10 years, really to see all these different ways. And there were some times when it was really hard, right? And I was like, this may be it. I may be, if an opportunity comes, or I might jump on it. But writing that out and seeing the back end of it and what God was doing, and really it was at probably the healthiest moment at 10 years that then God opened the opportunity for CSU. And I was like, man, this is when it's the healthiest. But I had mentored and discipled a guy who was a Sunday school teacher for me, and then a young guy that was starting into student ministry at New Orleans, and then he became our children's pastor, and then he stepped into my role when I came here. And so even that, all those things, you see God's hand of just the time, right, of 10 years. So just some of those benefits and staying there long enough to really see God. I mean, there was definitely some hard years where God dealt with some big sin things that were in our church. But during those years where we're counseling, really diving into spiritual restoration, other things of sin that was there. I mean, we were a church of 500. I think we baptized 65 people that year.
Wow.
And so the longevity gives you those seasons that you walk through.
Yes, it does. And I had my training with Youth for Christ. I had no intention of going to student ministry. I ended up in student ministry through many, many different things. But one thing that happened there was just I never saw myself staying in something like that. But Youth for Christ, they're the ones who trained me. I stayed with them 6 years. Would have stayed longer, but God had another plan. Ended up in the church for 29 years after that. And so the one thing they taught us was you won't even know what your ministry is doing till your 5th year.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so you just reemphasized that. It was those years after you've gone through your goodie bag and things that you knew that you could do.
Yeah, right.
And God gets a hold of it. So how do they last that long, though? I mean, have you seen a pattern with other youth workers around the country that you can say, there seems to be a pattern of how guys last more than 18 months, how they last?
Well, I can speak from my own experience. The things that contributed to that was, first was obviously, the calling and assignment of God, and just, planting you in the right place. And I interviewed at some places. I thought, oh, this will be a no-brainer. Like, this is going to be perfect. And then I got in the car with my wife. I was like, I got to tell her that I don't think this is right. And she was like, that didn't go good, did it? And I was like, okay, good. We're on the same page here. And then we get to this town, Picayune, Mississippi, and we drive in and we met, with the pastors and heard the senior pastor, the student committee. And there we're like, okay, they have the exact same vision we do.
Yeah.
Right. Of what student ministry, can look like. And so that start was pretty crucial. And also the senior pastor and I, that we meshed really well, became a great friend of mine. I actually, when his oldest was a 7th grader when I came, and when I left, his youngest had graduated high school. So I was the only youth pastor, right, that his 3 kids had throughout it. And so that when you're the youth pastor to your pastor's kids, that relationship, we can go sideways or it can be really strong. And ours it just really strengthened through that. I grew and learned a lot from him. He leaned on me a lot, especially, you outlast a lot of staff being there for 10 years.
Yes, yeah, you do.
And so he leaned on me a lot as well. especially on the kind of the back half of it. And so those sort of things, like that relationship was so crucial. And then also just the relationships we had right in the community and in the church, that was just really special. It honestly was really hard to leave. After 10 years, you would think you're ready for something else, but those relationships are so tight. And both of our kids were born there. Those are just special moments. And that's what kind of kept us going, through for 10 years there.
And once again, that is some great advice from you. Number one is that God didn't have you leave when things were horrible. He had you leave when things were at the peak. That's really a great time to leave because it puts a great taste in people's mouth. You've set up people to take your place. They're qualified because, they've hung in there with you. Those are great attributes. And the staying that long, there was a match up there. There was a match of the church was in line with what God had called you to, and you are in line with what God had called them to. I think those are key components for people to write down and go, okay, is this in line with God's call to me? Not do I just need a job? Do I need a ministry quick? Or that's the hardest thing. Now let's go back to Jay Strack, because you haven't got too much time, I know, here, and I've taken up your time, and I'm just grateful for it. Jay Strack's a reason. I sent him one of my episodes. I sent him one occasionally here and there of a young youth pastor from Charlotte, North Carolina, that my son, who's up in that area, and I both encouraged to go to Youth Pastor Summit. First time he'd been to anything like that. He'd only been in a little over a year as a youth pastor. Absolutely blew him away, which we knew it would. But here you are, Dr. Strack, Youth Pastor Summit, Student Leadership University. How did you guys match up? Give us a little bit of that background and what you do with them now.
Yeah, so Dr. Strack, Jay Strack, he's actually an alumni of Charleston Southern University. And so that's how I really got to know him. I've known of Dr. Strack, but that's where the relationship, where we started to begin to, have the opportunity for me to be in the same room with him and to get to know him to get to know us and what we're doing at Charleston Southern. And so he's actually opened the Strack Center for ministry and global leadership at Charleston Southern's campus. And so, he does a lot with us. He and we've designed an online student ministry program for those who are serving in the church. And so we record videos and create content for that. We've got some exciting things that we'll start announcing soon, that we'll be launching, next year. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing there, just to train student pastors. And he said, when we first kind of saw my bio, that I'd been in student ministry for 20 plus years. It's the same thing. He's like, hey, you've been here for that long. Tell me about it. And so he's actually been in some of my classes, and I always love to have him in my class, pouring into our students. He's heard me teach. And so that's really where it kind of began. And then having the opportunity to then teach and do breakouts in this partnership role that we have through the university. And so he invited me to then speak at his youth pastor summits. He and I did some breakouts together. And now this past year, I think he did a main stage presentation, and I did breakouts this year as well. So love that. I love Youth Pastor Summit. If your listeners ever get a chance to go, it's fantastic. It's great training, and I'd love to see them there.
And it was a staple diet for my volunteers for years to go once from, I think, the very first year that it started.
Oh, that's great.
Absolutely. I cannot say enough. Well, we used to get trained not only through Youth for Christ, but Mike Iaconelli and youth specialties and all those things. And that cost us a lot of money, to go to those things. It was worth every penny of it. But for Strack, for Dr. J and his son-in-law and Brent Crow and what they do, and you a part of these things, then they raise the money. They pay our way to be with them, and they are reaching thousands every year. And every time you say 1,000 or 9,000 or 20,000 youth workers, multiply that times 100, times 200, or whatever amount that they're reaching in that particular moment, and some much more. And so they're reaching, hundreds of thousands and millions by reaching that many youth workers. You're a major part of that. For him to have you on there means that, in my mind, you're just the top of the heap. You're an amazing person. And after listening to you and Jay putting us together so that I could have you as a guest on this podcast is beyond belief to me. What's some of your best moments at Youth Pastor Summit for you and in your communication there?
This last year, after now I've been there for 3 years, and youth pastors coming up and saying, hey, I always make sure to come to your breakout. And then to say, these are the things that we're going through that you talked about. That's exciting. I just love talking to youth pastors. I love seeing people and meeting people. They're in the field and hearing. I get energized just as much from it, learning from them, the questions that they have, and just getting to see the things that are happening, from California to Florida, as we travel and go to these different places, meet people, and just seeing, new youth pastors. We've noticed in the last few years, last couple of years, that the majority of new youth pastors are coming to these. They're in their first year or two is now trending towards 30s and 40s.
Wow.
And just second careers or God's calling them to step up in their churches, and so it's kind of an exciting time in ministry right now.
And this is going to sound really weird, and I just checked one place. This thing could have been totally off, but just the other day I looked up, okay, what is the average age of a youth pastor now? The average age, according to one article, was 51 years old.
Right.
The average age. And at 51, 50, they're trying to get rid of most people.
Right.
Instead of ministry, but the average age. So why do you think that is?
There's a need for youth pastors. There's no way to say that, to say anything other than that. The number of calls I get every week of we need a youth pastor. Do you have someone? And we're training as much as we can, as fast as we can at Charleston Southern, but we don't even have enough students for the city of Charleston. And what God's doing here when we have 48 people moving in every day.
Yes,
into this area. And so, and you just see that across the board for a variety of reasons, whatever that may be. Just the need for youth pastors. And so I think you're seeing that, it may just be a blip, but I think that's the way a lot of things are going right now is that, well, if we can't hire someone, from the outside, who's someone that's within our church, or who is someone that we're connected to, that may be filling a calling, and they're kind of stepping into that role. Whether it be bivocational or whether that's, a second career. So I think you're seeing some of that. Now, the exciting thing is on the other side of it, we're starting to see a lot more. The last 2 years, we've had our largest two, incoming classes of Christian studies students, coming with a clear call into ministry. And so those things are exciting. That we're seeing some of the fruit of just what God's doing in the hearts of teenagers and calling them into ministry, right, to reach others for what God is doing. So you kind of see both things happening right now, which is pretty exciting.
Right, and you're seeing them from a Christian campus, Christian University campus, and we're not talking about a small place. We're talking about in a very impactful place. And by the way, I've noticed that Charleston Southern, of course, I should have known that. I did know that Jay went there. Ever since just about the beginning, y'all have had representation at Youth Pastor Summit, which there should have been because of him and because of that connection. Since we're teaching, we're learning here. When people finish listening to this episode, what do you want them to take away?
Just thinking back, in our conversations, just the importance, and I'm just a big believer in this, the importance of adults, whatever that looks like, a youth pastor, a parent, youth workers, Sunday school teachers, just our students are so longing, to have adults in their life and to have those conversations. I mean, it's just so crucial. And also for those adults to look for those moments, right? Those moments in a student when they open up about what God is doing or what's going on in their life. And as we talked about the longevity of it, the importance of seeing that not as a singular conversation, but a conversation, an ongoing conversation, right? Because just like in ministry, seeing the program change, there's something special about being a youth pastor for someone when they come in as a sixth grader, when they graduate as a 12th grader, right? You've seen all those ebbs and flows, all right, through their life. And so having those adults that are in the long haul, having moments and conversations, throughout and there are times we can't do this all the time, but, an adult, a youth pastor, a parent, that long-term kind of conversation, ongoing conversation, never-ending conversation, throughout those teenage years. I mean, I see it now on the back end of my college students. One thing I do, I'll kind of end with this. One thing I do when I have my student ministry students, one thing I do is I have them write at one of my classes. I'll tell them, write out the names of some adults who poured into you spiritually. And I'll give them a minute or two, and they'll all come up with anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10, adult names that they write out. And I was like, the reason you're in this classroom, one of the main reasons is because that right there, that you have had people who poured into you, and the importance of having a ministry, right? And just finding ways to get those adults in. That's what really brings longevity in my mind.
Jonathan, thank you so much. This has been Dr. Jonathan Denton from Charleston Southern University. And Jonathan, I don't want to take any more of your time because you have just lit up our world today, and people who are going to hear this episode are going to get an amazing amount of information that they need. And you've got an amazing life. I hope you and your wife start getting more than 30 minutes sleep a night with all the things that y'all are doing and have done. I'll hope to talk to you again. Anything else we're missing here? Anything else you need to be telling us?
No, it's great. I appreciate it so much.
Hey, appreciate you.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.